Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, you're a badass.
And they know it.
Thank you so much for coming. I know it's been a few years since you've been here, but it's a real honor.
Right.
And there's so much for us to talk about. But I first want to say it was such a refreshing, you were such a refreshing presence and voice in the presidential election.
Thank you.
And I thought we could just start by, what do you think about your message that inspired people so much and touched people so much and got people motivated so much?
This conference is an example of my philosophical and attitudinal foundation. And this foundation is what America is today. We're not fringe. A political perspective stuck in the late 20th century is fringe.
Yeah.
So the fact that I looked odd is only because at this point, they're odd. So when you say that I was inspiring, I think what it was just people said, wow, she talks like people in the 21st century talk.
Right.
That's all. The 20th century worldview was very mechanistic. You know, the 20th century worldview was different from the 19th century worldview. Just like the 21st century perspective is different than the 20th. The 20th century perspective was very mechanistic. It was this Newtonian paradigm. The world is a big machine. In order to change it, you tweak the pieces of the machine. Right. That's over. Physicists, even Newton grew out of it. So evolved beyond it. So in the 21st century, as one British physicist said, it turns out the world is not a big machine, it's one big thought. The 21st century perspective is much more holistic, integrative. Any person, not just here, but in America today, it's common knowledge. This is not some out there perspective. If you want to change your life, you need to talk about internal issues as well as external issues. All that a country is a group of individuals. Right. So the same processes that prevail within the journey of an individual prevail within the journey of a country. And I think when I know when I actually talk to voters, not just in San Francisco, in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in Nevada, in South Carolina, this is where America is today.
Yeah. And did you have hesitancy putting your name out there because people are going to attack you, people are going to say negative things about you, particularly as a woman, they're going to find ways to try to diminish you. Did you have hesitancy, or you're like,
well, I did, but I had no idea how bad it would be.
Yeah.
I thought I would be attacked for being who I am. I didn't know that I was going to be attacked for being someone who is not even who I am.
Right.
And that was very difficult. It's very odd to be hated for being someone that you're not. Anti-science, anti-medicine, dangerous, crazy. It was like something out of the Middle Ages or something. Right. She's dangerous, she's crazy. Right. But I also understand where that came from. Yeah. After the second debate, when I was the most Googled person in 49 states, there was a lot of talk about my candidacy. Somebody clearly said, get that woman off the stage. And you're very naive if you think otherwise. And within 3 days, it began, and it was strategized, it was orchestrated. The words were all the same. She's anti-vax, she's anti-medicine, she's anti-science, she's dangerous, she's crazy, she's a grifter. And there was very little deviation from that. Those were the words, those were the phrases that they all used. They weren't going to have somebody up there questioning Big Pharma. They weren't going to have somebody up there talking about reparations. They weren't going to have somebody up there talking about the military-industrial complex the way I was. Their projection onto me that I was such a lightweight thinker. The interesting technique there. They didn't think I was lightweight or silly. They knew how very serious I was, and that's why they did it.
Yeah, got it. And I think part of what inspired us was the fact that traditional politics, as we know, is broken. and that there needs to be a new wave, and that a lot of the traditional politicians have got us into the mess, climate change.
A lot of traditional politicians, what?
It's traditional politicians have got us into the mess that we're in terms of climate change, in terms of income inequality, and we need a new approach. This was also part of how Trump presented himself, right?
Yeah.
Trump presented himself as like, I'm going to change things. I'm not your ordinary everyday. Do you think there's a way of speaking to his supporters or to people that help us feel more of a sense of we and less of a sense of a you and me? Is there something is there common ground we can all find?
Well, first of all, let's go back and see what happened 4 years ago. There was, and there still is, tremendous rage. Rage born of despair, born of a very legitimate sense of injustice. Millions and millions of Americans knowing that the system is rigged against them. It was broken for a purpose. There has been, over the last 40 years, a massive transfer of wealth into the hands of a very few Americans. And those very few Americans represent corporate forces that have basically hijacked the U.S. government, so that the government is little more than a system of legalized bribery now. It's a handmaiden to these overly corporatized forces that have a completely undue financial influence on our economy, thus on our people. Now, there were two candidates last time that spoke to that, who named it and spoke to the rage and despair that people felt: Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
People want to feel seen. They want to feel that their pain is recognized. And Hillary wouldn't name it. I'm not saying she didn't feel it. I'm not saying she wouldn't have addressed it, because I think she would have to the best of her ability. But she wouldn't name it. She was saying, we're going to just continue the success of the Obama years, and millions of people were saying, what a success, I'm drowning here.
Right.
So Bernie, and that was of great concern to me, because I felt there would be a great uprising born of this rage or despair. It was either going to be in the direction of a progressive populist like Bernie, or an authoritarian populist like Trump. What happened was that the DNC and establishment forces suppressed Bernie then, and what they have done in this campaign is the exact thing they did in the last one, including and beginning with what I just described about myself. Yeah. We have a situation where some people, it's almost like the modern equivalent, it's not almost like, it is the modern equivalent of men in a back room smoking cigars deciding who the candidate is. And the problem is that they represent those same corporatist forces, because the Democratic Party, as well as the Republican Party, has become so infiltrated by forces, particularly of corporate money. Right. It's a very, very serious problem. But I believe that this is the time right now for the American people to awaken, to see what's happening, and the next few weeks and the next few months will make all the difference.
You also have a quote from FDR where he said, much of the presidency is presenting a moral fabric or moral authority.
Yeah.
I think we're recognizing that more than ever. Can
Yes.
you speak to a little bit about why that seems so essential and what's happening now?
Right. Well, the line, of course, is from FDR, who said that the primary responsibility of the presidency, he said, is not the administrative aspects. Mm-hmm. The primary role of the president is moral leadership. Mm-hmm. What has happened, particularly in the last few decades, is that all of American politics, including the presidency, has become very utilitarian. It has become very, what we used to talk about as allopathic medicine, as opposed to integrative medicine. It's all about treating the symptom. Mm-hmm. And we now know, all of us here understand that transformation means you can't just treat the symptom, you have to treat the cause. A constitutional amendment can abolish slavery, it cannot abolish racism. Right. A 19th Amendment can give women the right to vote, it of itself cannot abolish misogyny. So much of the work we have to do is in our hearts. But you said something earlier before I came on, Soren. You said that we need to change the culture, and we need to be wiser, and we need to be more loving. I think, though, that our community, if I may say, the higher consciousness community, it's not just in our leaders. Mm-hmm. Because, look, Joe Biden is really a nice man, and so's Bernie, so is almost everybody who's running. The problem is not there. The issue where we must demand, you say vote kindness, and you vote Joe's kind and Bernie's kind. That's not, it's vote kind policies. We must awaken intellectually around this. When you have, for the sake of a $360 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia, led by that crown prince who we know murdered that journalist, Khashoggi, for the sake of a $360 billion arms sale, we are participating in a genocidal war. The United States is giving aerial support to a genocidal war that has starved tens of thousands of people, including thousands and thousands of children whose pictures are all over the internet. The issue, and I must say, and this is not just because I've endorsed him, it is Bernie who has led the effort in the Senate, whereby there was a nonpartisan effort to override Trump's sale. He unfortunately was able to override the veto. It's not just about someone's personality. It's not just about the surface issues of who's kind or who's nice. That's very immature, almost childish of us to think it's that simple. It is unkind that we are continuing to allow these millions of young people to be burdened by these college loans when all they want is to get into the game, to have some discretionary spending so that they too can get in there. That is unkind. It is unkind for us not to give people health care when you have tens of millions of people who live with chronic tension, chronic economic anxiety every day. What will happen if I get sick? What will happen if one of my children gets sick? What will happen if, how will I send my kids to college? How will I get out from under these college loans? That's where we have to address all our conversation about compassion. There is such a lack of compassion in a major transfer of wealth, a massive transfer of wealth that has gone on over the last few decades to the point where you have 1% of Americans controlling more wealth than the bottom 90%, and you have tens and tens of millions of Americans every single day living, cowering in this, what we know to be as important as anything else, an economic and an emotional position of fear and tension. If we want to talk about kind, help these people.
I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you. I think where we might differ is I feel like when a leader, a president says demeaning things, says racist things, says bigoted things, that's not healthy.
Oh,
and
I agree.
It seeps through the culture, and we need to make sure, that's my point.
We don't differ on
that. Or we need to make sure that they're modeling moral behavior, and I'm totally with you that it needs to be integrated into the policies. It's not just being a nice guy.
I feel
in the
agree
current
with that.
things, it's being modeled. Meanness and bullying is being modeled in a way that I feel like we might not see it right now, but it's starting to infiltrate the culture.
I could not agree more. The effect that this man's mean-spiritedness and rudeness and demeaning of people has had on the ethos of the country is immeasurably damaging. So I couldn't agree with you more. The only point I was trying to make is don't think it's as simple as voting for a Democrat and then it's all okay.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, George Bush was very nice, but he did invade Iraq, and that wasn't nice.
And we need to look at every level. And I think part of what Bernie is bringing up and AOC is bringing up is questioning things that most people have not questioned except for you and some others. Why don't we have national health care? Why do we have the military budget that we have? And I feel like there's an upswell of people, younger generation in particular, who are demanding a certain change. And do you feel like we're in that? How do you see us? Are we making progress? Are we not making progress? Is there hope?
How dare those of us who probably won't even be here in 30 years hold on to policies that will make it so hard for people who will be hitting their stride in 30 years?
Yeah.
It's so wrong. It's so wrong. I think, these young people are talking about literally, one of the things that I would say in all of my campaign stops, I would say, and it was always a powerful moment, I would say, how many people in this room have either been a young person who has said this or has heard a young person say, I'm not going to have kids because I just don't really see a future? And you would see the number of people who would raise their hands, and I would say, okay, you're raising your hand. How many, I want to ask right here, right now, how many have either said that or heard that? So I'm going to say to you now, please keep your hands up. And now I'd like you to just take a moment with these hands still raised, and I'd like you to look around the room. And I'd like you to hear me, please. This is deeply aberrational. This means something is deeply, deeply wrong. Thank you. There are always people in every generation, they just don't want to have kids. That's fine. That's natural. It's not for everybody. And I think vegans have been saying it for a long time. Vegans, I know, have been big on the whole population thing. But people who, under normal circumstances, and I've heard that one for a long time, but people who, under normal circumstances, would now be talking about, do I want 2 kids? Do I want 1? I mean, look, this room is a perfect example. This shows that something is so wrong. Something is extremely wrong. And we're like frogs in boiling water here.
And when you get to the heart of it,
yes,
the heart of it is income inequality, and is the what if we're kind of like try and pinpoint the acupuncture point that we most need to pinpoint? How do you see that?
And this is why I have felt for so long that our quote unquote crowd, we're the last people who should be standing on the sidelines. We should be the biggest grown-ups in the room. Because it's if you have a deeper understanding of all the psychological, emotional, intellectual, and historical dynamics that led you to where you are, you have a sense of where you live in relation to the past, where you can go in relationship to the future, what you owe your ancestors, what you owe it to your descendants to break right now. So this is the deal. Just like let's say you've gone to therapy, which most people in this room probably have.
You want to raise of hands?
So somebody asks you about your parents. Somebody asks you about your grandparents. Somebody asks you about your family system. Because when you know where you came from, you're more empowered. So this is the deal. It all started in 1776. When some very, very brave men, and I say they were brave because if the British had won the war, those men would have been executed as traitors. They, by signing the Declaration of Independence, inscribed into the founding of a nation in a way that was radical then and remains radical today, the idea that all men are created equal, God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that government is instituted to secure those rights, and that it is the right of the people, if the government's not doing their job, to alter it or to abolish it. That was so huge, so aspirational, so enlightened. And that's where it began, and that's also where it got gnarly, because 41 out of the 56 signers were themselves slave owners. Wow. So the American story is a dichotomy, a characterological bipolarity. It is built into our DNA that we are both. We have always been both. Today we are both. Every generation reenacts
You're both
the
fighting
contest.
for justice and supporting
That's
injustice.
right. We are filled with people whose hearts are ablaze with the possibility of a society where anybody could be able to soar. That is so radical. No matter who you are, no matter who your parents were, what your sex, what your sexuality, what your color, what your ethnicity, what your religion, or no religion. That is, there are many of us, and we fill America today who are ablaze with, wow! And not only the amazement at that, but a sense of gratitude that that has been bequeathed to us, and a sense of deep responsibility to protect that.
Yeah.
But we have also seen in every generation, including ours, those who would transgress against those principles, usually for their own financial purposes, even unto the point of wickedness and violence.
And they get away with
others.
it often.
Well, I don't know. Over time, I don't know. Abolition was answered by, slavery was answered by abolition. The institutionalized suppression of women was answered by the women's suffragette movement. Segregation and institutionalized white supremacy was answered by the civil rights movement. Over time, we tend to self-correct. The issue is, it's our turn now. The issue is for us to understand we're just reenacting. Even Thomas Jefferson said, it is the general tendency of the rich to prey upon the poor. Now, that doesn't mean, not every rich person in America is a greedy bastard.
Right.
Not every poor person in America is holy or pure.
Right.
This is not about individuals, but it is about very corrupt systems.
Yeah.
Even when you said a few minutes ago the system was broken, there are people who purposely broke it for their own financial purposes.
Sure. And continue to.
Right, so for them it's not broken, for them it's working very, very well.
Yeah. And
But
so if we were going to
but it breaks our democracy.
If we were going to pinpoint that transformative switch
Yeah.
that we need
When
to
did
do
it
in
happen?
our own individual hearts and
Yeah.
we need to do collectively, how would you best put into words that transformative switch that does that?
Okay, it started in 1980, with the election of Ronald Reagan. It happened in the 1980s, the introduction of an economic paradigm called trickle-down economics. And it is the idea that the corporation should have, all the corporation owes is financial fiduciary responsibility to its own stockholders.
Right.
And that then the stockholder class would get very rich, but all the money would trickle down because they would be job creators. All that money would trickle down and lift all boats.
Right.
Now, after 40 years, I think it's fair to say the jury is in. It has not lifted all boats. It has left millions and millions of people without even a life vest. It has decimated America's middle class. It has created the largest income inequality since 1929, with, as I said before, 1% of Americans controlling more wealth than the bottom 90%. It is unnatural.
Yeah.
It is like saying all the blood in my body is going to be concentrated on my left arm. And Louis Brandeis, the late Supreme Court Justice, said, you can either have large amounts of wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both.
Wow.
Now, I do want to point out something, because I think this is really important. That economic theory came out of the University of Chicago School of Economics, a man named Milton Friedman, who, they were called the Chicago Boys, but I think it's fair to note. Milton Friedman himself said, yes, we need to do this, but it's only fair and safe if we also have universal basic income.
Wow.
He himself said that. Now, what happened was not only that this economic theory was promulgated, billions of dollars spent by people who were electing officials on every single level to promulgate this theory. What happened then in the 90s was this huge influx of economic influence on government in a way that had never been true before. With the Supreme Court saying that money is free speech, and of course that ultimately climaxed in this century with the Citizens United decision. So that in the 80s was this economic theory, and then starting in the 80s, the economic power of those who had that money to dominate American politics, turning our government into little more than a system of legalized bribery. Our government is now handmaiden, and it's interesting because once again, our crowd understands what it means to regress. We have regressed to an aristocratic paradigm. And it's a new aristocracy. It's not landed gentry. It's now health insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, oil and gas companies, chemical companies, food companies, agribusiness, and military-industrial complex. It is the most traditional American thing to push back against that overreach. That's why we have child labor laws. That's why we have unions. This is such a moment for us to be genuinely patriotic Americans and to say in the kindest way, the most elegant way, the most stylish way possible, this shit needs to stop now.
Yeah. And this is your campaign.
Pardon?
This is your campaign. How do you see your life unfolding in this moment? What are you called to do? Are you called to continue to speak this voice? Are you called to write? Are you called to help Bernie? Are you taking it day by day?
I was on CNN this morning talking about Bernie. I take great satisfaction in being as inconvenient as possible. And I see what happens. They could shut down my campaign, but they can't shut me up.
Yeah.
And I And this is why I'm grateful to be at places like this, and I'm so grateful for you for having me. In the 1960s and 1970s, we had a philosophical revolution, and it was also political. And the people who held aloft the great philosophical vision of that time spoke within a political context. Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, etc. That song was stopped because they shot the soloists.
Yeah.
But they can't shoot a song. We need a choir now. It can't just be individuals who are saying this. If you feel this in your heart, you need to say it. We all need to rise up now. The zeitgeist of this moment is not just about individuals.
Yeah.
It's about an uprising in the American heart and a refusal to be silent. You know, Martin Luther King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter. These things matter, and we have been inundated to the point where we are preoccupied by the ultimately meaningless.
Yeah.
And that's a change that must happen within ourselves. We must stop it now with the constant chatter about things that don't ultimately matter. Even people in this world who are the most disgusted with America right now, rolling their eyes about America, they also know this world will not be better if American democracy goes down.
Yeah.
And even those who are disgusted by us are praying that we get this right. This is so important. We must do this. That man must not get a second term.
And so, and is there a, how do we best support you?
Oh, thank you.
How do we best support you?
Well, if you are not on my mailing list at marianne.com,
Okay.
I hope that you will get there.
Your last book is Love and Politics?
Yes, that's right. Thank you. I wrote a book called A Politics of Love, which talks about a lot of these things and how we take the transformational perspective and apply it to politics. You know, spirituality is not just some category over here, while relationships are here and work and money is here and body and health is over here. It's the underpinning of everything. You know, I grew up at a time where, like in my college years, we read Ram Dass and Alan Watts in the morning, and we went to Vietnam War anti-war protests in the afternoon.
Nice combination.
There wasn't this bifurcation. It was everything. It was sex, it was music, it was politics, it was spirituality. There are a lot of hours in the day. Take care of everything.
So in 60 seconds, what do you want to leave us with? Or have you said what you need to say?
The only thing I want to leave you with is gratitude for having me here. It's an honor to be here. You know, you can only speak as deeply as the listening that exists, and that's to your credit that you're brought together people who are here for deep listening. You know, in A Course in Miracles, it says, an idea grows stronger when it is shared. So this is very powerful what you're doing here. You're sharing powerful ideas, wise ideas. And I think conferences like this work like a time release capsule. The real work is not what happens while we're here, but what happens when you leave here. We heal as a society the same way we heal individually, one aha at a moment. And the whole idea of nonviolence, of Gandhi, of Dr. King, is that self-purification must precede political action. So I hope you will gain much wisdom here. I hope it will deepen your listening, deepen your reflection, deepen your prayer, your meditation, whatever your practice is, and then I hope we all go kick ass in 2020.
All right, Marianne Williamson, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Love you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. God bless you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much. I love you. Thank you.